Hello everyone, this is Mohit here from Master of Sales. Today we have Noel Thomas and Abhijit Kataria from bgig.io, and we would have this session with them, knowing about their journey and their strategies towards excellence in sales. Hi Noel, welcome Noel and Abhijit. And to start off with, just give us a brief background of your journey, how you landed up in sales, and what interests you to be spend a good amount of time there.
Sure. Uh, okay, my journey is it's always the toughest question. To be very honest, I always find it tough talking about myself. You can probably call me the first uh, modest salesperson, if there ever was such a term. I know it's oxymoron. But yeah, to give you a sense, I kind of stumbled into sales. Actually, I kind of I did science in college. I studied physics. I got into the workforce straight after college, so I'm not your typical MBA grad jumping into sales or post grad jumping into sales. I literally got placed into my first campus placement. I started in finance at a hedge fund called DE Shaw. I very soon realized that the whole uh, business model of finance and fintechs in India. This is in 2010. I realized that that business model really wasn't for me. That whole idea of working in a back office. My learning essentially was Google search. I think that's the only thing I learned from that role, and I wanted to expand my horizons. Um, I've always been a curious person. So I realized that very early on that it's better to chase learning in a role rather than brands. So I kind of took some time off. I lost my dad also around that time with my family. So I thought, let me just settle things around with the family. It took about 6 months off, and then I got back into the workforce. I joined a boutique consulting firm called TNA Consulting. I used to work with a lot of foreign trade councils. Like UK Trade and Investment, Swiss Business Hub, Invest in Finland, and all the US states and their trade arms and their government trade representatives. Essentially, the role was pitching the India story, and I think that is essentially, literally, quite my first brush with sales. I had to sell India as an investment destination to a lot of these trade councils, and you can imagine selling India in 2010, 2011, when we were like something like 300 or something or 200 something on the Ease of India, ease of doing business rankings. Opening a company was like 1 month long, not your typical 1 week long. Shutting a company was even worse. FDI limits were like very restrictive. So it was a hard sell, but I think a lot of the basics that I learned in sales from that role, essentially, how do you prospect? How do you research your market? How do you kind of employ the role of being a consultative salesman? So I think it was more out of necessity that I jumped into sales because it was a large part of being a consultant is also sales. Um, and yeah, that's pretty much my story of how I kind of jumped into sales. And then from there on, it's been quite a journey. I don't know if you want me to expand on that as well, or if you want to take it as it goes.
No, just a brief, like what
Sure,
happened
sure,
after your
sure,
consulting
sure.
to now.
Sure, sure. So, as I was consulting, one sector that really caught my eye was clean tech and renewables. And India as a solar destination was starting to pick up. And I kind of connected with a lot of investors and stakeholders within the clean tech ecosystem. I connected with a few investors and family offices, and they said that they were keen on also buying into the India story for renewables. So I kind of went back, did my research and my homework, and identified a few sectors and spaces which could create where there was a viable investment opportunity. Water came to be one. Connected with one investor, pitched the idea of investing in water and clean tech within the water space in India, and they backed me, and they found a few co-founders because I was still like 22 at that time. Me and the co-founders connected. We kind of created a minimum viable product. We actually did some POCs within the market. We basically identified waterless washrooms as the space that we wanted to get into. And the interesting thing is we knew that it would seem ridiculous to a lot of people, but the fact is there were already use cases. The fact that the Commonwealth Games had a lot of waterless washrooms deployed in a metro city like Delhi, and that too with government validation, told us that there is a market for these kind of products in India. And of course, we did our sample surveys, and we scoped the market, etc. So we did our research. But once we established a minimum viable product and we realized there is product market fit, we kind of went ahead and incorporated a company. I had the courage to actually quit my consulting job. Again, remember, this is 2011, 12, when startups were still not as sexy as they are today. So finding the courage to kind of quit a full-time, well-paying job when you're so fresh and young in that career was still quite monumental. I think kudos to the kids today. They're far more courageous and bold in taking the kind of risks and moves that they need. But at that time, it just wasn't so easy. So kind of doing all of that, and then and also kind of creating a market and educating a market about a product which I think India still wasn't ready for at that time. To give you a sense, I literally walked into a boardroom in Chennai of a major financial institution, a multinational financial institution, and me and my co-founders, we got laughed at. Um, and 7 years later, after I had exited my startup, I got a call from one of those board members saying, "Hey, are you guys still selling this product? We had a flood and then we had a drought here in Chennai, and we really need this." And that just kind of dawned on me that 7 years ago we were talking about water, and now water is just so badly utilized and underpriced and undervalued. And your next wars are going to be over water, honestly. So I think the Indian market wasn't ready for that, and probably still isn't in terms of the maturity that's required. But I think that gave me a lot of personal satisfaction throughout the journey. We discovered a lot about market sentiment. We discovered a lot about how certain segments work. We discovered network effects. We tied up with facility management companies because they manage buildings and they manage washrooms in a lot of buildings. So we did a deal with Jones Lang LaSalle, and they got us into Google, into Infosys, and all. So things were looking pretty great. We created we had a revenue pipeline of about 5 CR. We had about 5,000 installations. Literally had our technology installed in half of Infosys's washrooms across all their campuses in the country. Around that time, my investors kind of wanted to exit the business. They wanted a quick exit for their own reasons, and they we were compelled to sell our business to an American competitor at a good premium. So I wasn't too happy with it, but obviously, when you own a minority of a company and you have external investors, there are things that go on at the back of a boardroom. So that gave me another education in boardroom politics and how to navigate that. But all said and done, that was an amazing experience for me. I think being an entrepreneur, exiting a company all within the age of 22, 23, probably kind of set the stage for me going forward. So having been a salesperson, then having been an entrepreneur, and then realizing what it takes to run a business and incubate a business using your own money and somebody else's money, it kind of gave me a newfound appreciation for a more consultative sales process. I think I became less transactional as a salesperson, more consultative, more empathetic. I kind of again stumbled into an opportunity with a global marketing communications firm called Gutenberg. They were basically a public relations company based out of headquartered in New York and with offices in Delhi and the UK. And they basically had enterprise clients like Wipro and Infosys again for public relations, and they needed help in professionalizing the sales process, uh, making it more proactive and outbound instead of a reactive and inbound sales process, digitizing it, so leveraging tech basically, and also moving towards a digital first, basically transitioning to a digital marketing firm. So Gutenberg, I think I spent like 5.5 years, quite a long time, simply because I had the opportunity to not just create sales processes from 0 to 1, not just to work with global teams and people who were probably twice my age and kind of project manage pitches, not just to kind of learn firsthand the basics of negotiating, not just because it was a transition for me from product sales from my clean tech firm to services. So that was also there. And then I also had the opportunity to pilot and completely own and spearhead the startup vertical. I think around 2014, I saw that the startup industry is really heating up and getting mature. You had companies like your Flipkarts and Paytms growing in stature, your InMobis, your Matrix partners and Sequoia started making the news every week. And I realized this is, these, if we start partnering with these companies now and we help them and we take a consultative approach, we can also grow as a service provider with these organizations. So that was quite an amazing journey. Kind of ended up, growing our revenue pipeline from 10% globally to about 50% just from startups alone. Again, pitching network effects and pitching to VCs and getting access to their portfolio companies, and that's a tactic that I love, honestly. Um, it's a great way to you guys. I don't know if you folks are doing that, but that's something for you and your teams to also explore. But that got us a lot of success. And generally being a little more honest and empathetic in the way we conducted our sales and our sales conversations. I think that got us a lot of goodwill at Gutenberg. So Gutenberg was 2013 to 2019. I think late around mid 2019, I realized I kind of learned a lot, and nothing was new. And I keep pitching and giving yarn to these startups as a consultative salesperson, and I think I want to be a part of this startup ecosystem myself. I'm kind of missing some of that fire, and I want to kind of own it. I'm tired of taking a 360-degree view as a consultant. I really want to get in the mix. So that happened. I found the courage to quit my full-time, well-paying job. Joined up as a consultant with a clean tech firm for a few months, and post that, then I worked with a company called Westcharge. Westcharge is a wireless charging technology firm. They've created a advertising platform for B2B enterprises to engage consumers using wireless charging as a technology, and they're also building a wireless charging platform for electric vehicles. So that was again kind of for me, access to the whole product ecosystem. Um, and I think if I had to define my time there, it would be pre-pandemic. Everything was amazing. Post-pandemic, it was all about survival. Post-pandemic was literally a complete reset of everything. I don't think anyone was prepared for it. Having to make some hard decisions like cutting your staff, giving them pay cuts, taking a huge pay cut yourself, uh, extending your company's runway, maintaining those B2B sales relationships, not letting anything go cold, strategic pivots using your entire technology, value, and supply chains, creating a B2C or a direct to consumer sales model and taking that online. Anything to just maximize that runway. I think that entire experience was all over that. Um, and I my post pandemic experience was far longer than my pre-pandemic experience. It was about a year and about 14 months or so. And I think I reached a stage where I was like, okay, this company will survive without me, but this pandemic is not going anywhere for now, and things are kind of stagnant. And I also need a change in my growth. It can't always be survival, and that's where BGig came along. LinkedIn helped me find this job, by the way. That's why. But BGig came along. BGig is basically it's a platform connecting enterprises to freelance technology talent. The problem statement that it's trying to solve is essentially that hiring technology talent is right now in today's market post pandemic is cumbersome. It is costly. It is not easy. It is a lengthy process, um, and it may not always yield the desired results.
Yes.
So I don't know if you've been tracking the space, but I think you and your teams have also been trying to build a tech product. So you must have faced this yourselves. But we've reached a stage where there's been a massive saturation in the demand for technology skills. Every company wants to be a technology company post pandemic, and that means everybody has to digitize or transform some way or the other. Everybody wants to build their own ecosystems and platforms, um, and there's a gold rush for talent right now, and you have people fresh out of college demanding 6 and 7 figure salaries right now. Bangalore is probably a war zone when it comes to tech talent right now, as you can attest to. So the future of work is essentially, as everyone has realized, it's a hybrid model. People have full-time teams, but they also have remote distributed teams. And the value proposition that we're trying to plug into is that uh, it's okay to have a hybrid work model. It's okay to outsource your work projects to technology freelancers. It's safe. It is scalable, and it can also breed innovation. So I think that's the value proposition that we're essentially trying to plug into. India is a few years away from this model, but the fact that you have platforms like Upwork and TopTal and Fiverr and Freelancer doing really amazingly well is kind of a sign that there is already a maturity and exposure to this kind of model in the market out there. So that's those are just some of the kind of problem statements and value propositions that we're kind of working towards. And yeah, with BGig, it's been about 6 months, almost 6 months. And it's been quite a journey as well for us. We took the first few months to understand and scope the market. We did things that we did not want to, which is full-time hiring as well, because we wanted to understand the market and understand the enterprise demand. We also wanted to understand what the tech talent over here has been saying and how they feel. So it's given us some interesting learnings, and we use this time in the background to kind of build up our MVP. So we recently launched our product on the 15th of October. We actually launched a new version of our platform, a beta version, and we actually gone live. And we have some big things scheduled for the new year as well, 2022 as well. So yeah.
Great. Great, Noel. In fact, a great journey, and I'm particularly amazed at how you have planned things out. So, on the front of adding up to yours, where you have been in entrepreneurship, you have founded companies, you have led sales team for corporate startups, and a quite proper exposure in terms of meeting people. So, do you think that being an entrepreneur, where most of the founding team jobs is towards customer finding or customer satisfaction or sales in general, does that help you in becoming a good salesperson? And is it vice versa as well, that being a salesperson helps you start up or helps you get customers more easily and you're more confident? What are your views on that?
So look, my views will anyways be biased because I've experienced entrepreneurship early on and experienced sales also early on. So my views will definitely be biased because I do know that there are founders and entrepreneurs who actually don't know sales. They know A to Z of operations and running an organization, or maybe they know A to Z of product and tech, but they just don't know how to do sales. So obviously my views will be biased. What I can say, or the best way for me to answer this question is that in my own experience, being an entrepreneur made me a lot more empathetic to the entrepreneur sitting across me from the table. And I think if you're not an empathetic salesperson, then, and if it's simply a transactional relationship, you're not really going to go far, honestly. I mean, if that is the salesperson that you are, then in my opinion, you're a lazy salesperson and you better beware because technology is out there to automate you. You're not going to stick around. But for me, the core fundamental of sales is that it is a psychological exercise, and part of that means being empathetic, putting yourself across the table in the other person's shoes, and being able to kind of pitch your service and your value proposition as something that they need, and that's something that they may not realize early on. So I think that is what it gave me early on. The other thing is, I feel every salesperson, the ultimate goal of every salesperson should be that they need to become an entrepreneur. The end goal of a salesperson for me is, boss, you got to start your own enterprise. You have taken ownership of sales and creating a revenue pipeline. You know all of that now. You've mastered that. Now the next step for you is you run your own organization. Right? No man is an island. When salespeople say they need to learn, a lot of times you'll hear, okay, I wish I learned more about product. I wish I learned more about marketing, or I wish I learned more about, maybe psychology or behavioral sales and things like that. So there's always a kind of a new learning or a new skill set that salespeople can acquire to become better salespeople. And for me, there's no better education than being an entrepreneur because you're literally handling everything. Obviously, you delegate, but you kind of take a 360-degree view of things. You kind of connect the dots, and there's nothing that kind of braces you for that than entrepreneurship. So yeah, for me, the end goal of a salesperson should be some point in your life become an entrepreneur.
So, do you think that anyone who wants to become an entrepreneur start getting in some sales role of your target market?
Absolutely. I mean, for all of those who want to start their own business or have some ideas out there, there's no better role which kind of exposes you or at least gives you a first-hand exposure to the rigors of starting a business than sales. Because you literally, if you look at the methodology of sales, unlike say operations or finance or anything else, uh, for me the fundamental is always research. You got to research your target market. You got to understand who your customers are. You got to kind of understand who your competitors are and who your peers are in the space. So there's a lot of research involved, and a good salesperson would know that. All the best, very best salespeople all do their research. And now you have a lot of automation and platforms out there which can make, create new efficiencies when it comes to requiring this kind of info. But yeah, you always have to kind of start with your research. You have to overcome a lot of biases, personal biases, a lot of personal fears to pick up that phone and call people or write that first cold email or warm email or whatever. Again, there's a lot of automation in these things, but at some point you have to navigate a conversation, right? The whole idea of being a good salesperson is how you can really navigate a complex conversation and how you can create a need for something that probably that person didn't even realize in the first place. Um, and I mean, yeah, for me, there's, being a salesperson kind of opened me up to the A to Z of demand generation, of market incubation, of partnerships and navigating partnerships, of negotiation. Negotiation is such an important part of sales, and I think people early on realize, okay, okay, I've created a pitch, I've prospected, I've qualified this lead, I've reached out to them, I've created a pitch, um, and in my experience, I've seen a lot of junior salespeople being excluded from conversations such as negotiation and re-evaluation and the final purchasing decision conversations. And my message
Hmm.
to sales leaders out there is kind of involve your junior sales teams also in these conversations, because that is how you help them grow. That is how they kind of connect the dots as well. So I mean, every entrepreneur has to get into negotiation some way or the other, and there's no better way to get introduced to that than sales. And then obviously follow-ups, right? You book your revenue, you have to collect your revenue, you have to invoice your revenue, all the dirty work, so to speak. So I think I honestly am sorry to sound like a broken record, but there's nothing more holistic in terms of the education or the educational experience of running a business than being a salesperson and owning that process end to end.
Truly understand that. Many of the skills which you will require being a business leader is what you will inherently learn while selling, like owning an account, doing research, being responsible for tasks which are not well defined, many things, being damn cold in outreach. So these things certainly help. I think even in my journey, I've seen that helping. Being a salesperson first approach gives you empathy, gives you the thing to do all the things. I totally agree to that. Yeah, on things to add up, normally what happens in sales is for a good, let's say an enterprise sales segment, in many of the times we are at the right place at the right time for successful closure. Enterprise deals are difficult where we try to sell when the other person does not require. It is difficult. It could be possible. So, what ratio do you think in such sales could be that you are the right person at the right time versus your selling skills? Like, what ratio is important in closure of a deal?
So don't call me cynical, but there's never going to be a right time. Honestly, there's never going to be a right time. If any salesperson talks to the CEO, they'll say the right time is yesterday. Any salesperson talks to their own sales team, they'll say the right time is tomorrow. The middle ground is the right time is today. There's never going to be a right time. And I think I would say I would attribute a large part of it. I'd say 70% of it is about how do you navigate the conversation and your skill sets in navigating that conversation. The remaining 30%, which is your so-called timing, which involves the research, the qualification, staying on top of the industry, marketing and all. Yes, that helps you set a good base. That is important. I'm not denying that. that remaining 30% that helps you get the entry point, but that only informs your closure, right? There's that it can only inform your closure. At the end of the day, the difference between a great salesperson and an average one is closure and metrics on closure. So I would place a lot more importance on skill sets in terms of closing in the entire process.
Great, yeah, totally add opinion to that. So you mentioned about sorry, automation doing a good chunk of part for salespeople. So what do you think should be left for a salesperson to do it himself, and what do you think things which can be automated in a sales process of prospecting, qualifying, before that lead generation, closure? Where do you think can automation help, and where do you think the salesperson has to be on his shoes for that?
Oh, great question. So if you see automation and what's happening, I honestly think so. Automation is there's kind of a layer of automation in every level of the sales funnel. If you think about it, I think the parts which are most affected by automation and which require the least human intervention are obviously the qualifying and the prospecting stages. And you're seeing kind of I don't know if you read the news, but platforms like Lucia raising $200 million in revenue, things like that. The entire prospecting side is got completely automated. Um, where I do think there is some level of human interaction is obviously the middle of the funnel when it comes to the evaluation, and obviously the negotiation stage. I think that is where you need the most amount of human interaction. So if you had to simplify it in short, I think the middle and the bottom of the funnel, sorry, the top and the bottom of the funnel is which I see completely getting automated, and the middle, that being the evaluation and the negotiation stage, which is where you do need a human element, and rather, dare I say, a skilled human element. You need to be a little masterful and skillful in those conversations.
Great. And any views on a good tech stack to have at different stages of funnel? Like in your experience, if it has helped you in getting good results in terms of automation?
So, no, great question. In terms of prospecting, I can't keep gushing about this, and I don't think it gets the recognition it deserves. But LinkedIn has been one of the most amazing tools on the planet. I don't think people give because it's seen more as a social network and all. I think people really underscore the fact that with a LinkedIn premium account, literally you can reach anyone anywhere. Obviously, how you craft those outreach and that conversation depends on how well you are at positioning yourself. But the fact that it opens so many doors is amazing, and the network effects of that are amazing. LinkedIn has been an amazing tool. I think recently, tools like Lucia have been quite amazing. Obviously, there is a debate on the ethics of randomly reaching out to somebody's email generated by an AI. But I think let's park that aside for now. I think it's quite effective for people who need results and who need actionables. So I think these are two things that I can name drop. When it comes to the middle of the funnel, honestly, I was somebody who started with a Zoho 10 years back and then moved to Salesforce and moved to a very archaic version of Salesforce as a CRM. And then I discovered HubSpot pretty late because in my head, I had always thought of HubSpot as a marketing tool. And then the more that you see marketing and sales as a role getting combined, because a lot of marketing is now performance driven, which means there has to be a sales and a numeric element to it, a results driven element to it. So the more that started happening, I realized that HubSpot is an amazing tool, and I still can't stop gushing about HubSpot. It's free. You can do whatever, 1 million contacts. For any kind of independent salesperson out there using CRM and trying to be in a kind of hybrid marketing / sales / growth role, I can't stop gushing about HubSpot. I think there are some new tools. Pipedrive is also quite interesting. I've used that as well. So I think these are some tools that I can definitely name from.
Sure. Great. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks for
I just also
the.
I forgot to kind of mention. Sorry. Since as a salesperson, you do also have to work with a couple of teams across geos and across disciplines. Obviously, your Slack is way more professional than WhatsApp, and way more efficient than email. So, project management tools like Asana and Jira for people who have to work with tech teams as well. I think, yeah, these are a few other tools that I can name drop. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for that. So, what are some of the KPIs which you track for your team for throughout your sales processes, sales teams? What are some of the KPIs which you track apart from, of course, revenue, which we all do?
Yeah, I think you you named the big daddy in terms of revenue. But I think for me, what's important is if you start at the top of the funnel, obviously is want to keep a track of how many conversations, how much of that outreach translates into a engaging conversation, regardless of whether that conversation leads to the next step or not. That immediately shows me how well I'm positioning myself in the market and whether that value proposition is creating an impact in the market or not. So I think those are some early indicators and things to look out for. The other thing is obviously, there's no bigger pain and frustration than a blocked pipeline. So for me, it's always I want to keep a track of what's blocking that pipeline for me. So a lot of opportunities stuck, and whatever is not moved to a negotiation stage or an evaluation stage, that's a worrying metric for me. So I want to minimize that metric and that ratio a lot. And I'd say the last metric that I also want to map is not my revenue. That's not important. I don't learn anything from revenue and from closed deals. I always learn from lost deals, regardless of whatever the reason is. And I think it's important for every budding salesperson to also learn from your, lost deals and your losses. Don't be afraid to ask the prospects why they don't want to go with you and why they don't want to purchase your product or service. Don't be afraid to ask them what could have worked and what could have helped you in that entire purchasing decision. I think that's where the biggest learning comes. So yeah.
Great. Yeah. Lost revenue is one of the best KPIs to track if you want to build a successful sales culture and team. Totally agree to that. So now just moving to the end part of it, we had a good session on your views, your journey about the sales process. And part of it is your core opinions on some diverging topics. So kind of a rapid fire. So should there be monetary incentives, cash based or no monetary incentives for salespeople?
Absolutely. And I'll go one step further. Put some skin in the game, put equity, put sweat equity as well. I will go one step further. Don't just keep it monetary, but keep it equity linked. Especially for young organizations, early stage startups and all. While it's important to build great products and services, etc., I think don't discount the fact that your first, rupees of sales and revenue is what will help you. Your first logos that you onboard, those are what's going to help you get network effects. So I think start seeing salespeople as a mission critical part of your companies and cultures, and give them skin in the game as well.
And do you want it only on closure, which is revenue, or incentives on effort as well, whatever they're trying to do?
Obviously, the ultimate, KPI for every salesperson is easy because it's revenue linked. Yeah, that's a good point that you put there. I think a hybrid model should definitely be there. Definitely map awareness in the market. Keep a long tail pipeline. If an opportunity didn't close in one quarter, or if it didn't convert in one quarter, but that same organization or prospect comes back in the next quarter and liked the way you pitched, liked the consultative approach and all, and they want to do business again, map some of those kind of metrics and all. So I think reward your sales team for those kind of efforts and numbers as well.
And do you prefer competition between your teammates, like for example showing them on a leaderboard that he's performing top, he's performing bottom, or anything related to any KPI? Do you think it should be?
I will take a balanced approach. I think competition is good, But if you gamify the competition, and I believe you and your team are trying to do that by your platform, I think I prefer a gamified approach rather than a very cutthroat, kind of Glengarry, Glen Ross kind of approach where you create a culture where your own salespeople are conniving and conspiring against each other. That's definitely not the culture you want to build, because it eventually harms the company.
Organization.
It's essentially detrimental to the company, where you've created such a high pressure and high performance environment that nobody is helping each other, nobody's talking to each other. There are these Chinese walls, and everybody is an island, and everybody's saying, okay, I need to deliver. I'm literally competing against my own teammate. I'm just going to do things my way. No, sales cannot work in a silo. I think I strongly believe in the idea that other sales team members and other sales leaders can feed off and learn off each other's energy, their mistakes, their wins. It has to be company first. So I think it's a fine line to balance that. And I think gamifying it, yes, a gamified leaderboard, yes. But I've known sales cultures, and I've been a part of a sales culture where maybe leaders, CEOs, founders, etc., prop up one salesperson publicly and denigrate the other, and why don't you be more like this person and all these subtle things kind of build a negative culture, and I think that's a very fine line to walk. I think that says more about the leaders than the sales culture, actually. So yeah.
Truly agree to that. You define your culture by many such small or big things which you do with your team. Totally. That. So just on an ending note, what's the best or the weirdest excuse you've heard from your teammate for not achieving something? Normal between salespeople, but as you mentioned that to the founders it is just yesterday, to the leader it is tomorrow. What is an excuse around it which you would have heard in recent times?
My colleague Abhijit is here, but don't worry, I'm not going to give him too much attention. He's given me some interesting excuses. No, but I'm not going to say that. The most interesting excuse that I've ever heard, I think I had a colleague who got diarrhea and could not work on a pitch many years ago. And that colleague's spouse wrote to me saying that they have diarrhea, and so sorry, I had to take care of them, and that's why they could not make it for a pitch. It was a pitch with $1 billion company, and my colleague didn't turn up for the pitch. And I had to literally make something up randomly on the spot to just not lose face. We obviously did not win that pitch, but that I think is one of the weirdest excuses that I've ever received. Yeah, diarrhea.
Yeah. So thanks, Noel. Thanks for your views. We had a great session with you, and happy to have interacted with you. Great insights on many key sales terminologies and processes. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Mohit and team. I really appreciate it, and I got to say kudos to you and the team. This is amazing. It's great that you've created this platform and these educational sessions. I hope it inspires a lot more people to get into sales. I always think that of all the business functions, like legal, marketing, finance, HR, everything has been professionalized, but you don't really have this whole idea of professional education for sales. You have an MBA in marketing, but you do not have an MBA in sales. So it's something that is a lot being kind of master student driven, and I'm glad that you have platforms like Masters of Sales to inspire the next generation to kind of navigate a more complex world and still retain that human element for the sales process.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you for having me, and glad to share my thoughts. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. In fact, our whole thesis was, although we have a lot of content around sales, but sales is best experienced when someone who has been in industry doing things actually shares out, okay, what's he doing, rather than founders and VCs sharing that this is how you do it or this is how it should happen. So that was our whole thesis, and you have rightly put your words on that thesis. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks, Mohit. Take care. Thanks for having me.
Sure.